Hello and welcome to the 23rd episode of the Pepper Podcast. For those who are returning, welcome back. And if you are new, the Pepper Podcast covers a wide range of spicy events that occur in our daily lives. Two high school students tackle heated topics through discussion. I'm your host, Jay Mehta, and joining me is my co-host, Andy Watson-Oskunpen. And today's topic covers the effects of climate change on the consumer market and how the deceptive industry of greenwashing has manipulated a movement to increase their profits. In a new survey of 1,491 executives across different industries of the world, CEOs and other C suite leaders said that sustainability was a priority. But 58% also admitted that their companies were guilty of greenwashing. Among leaders in the US, that figure rose to 68%. And about two-thirds of executives globally questioned whether their company's sustainability efforts were genuine. So, just kind of getting into this, I guess, Andy, can you kind of define what greenwashing really is?
Yeah, so greenwashing, also called green sheen, is a form of advertising or marketing spin in which green PR and green marketing are deceptively used to persuade the public that an organization's products, aims, and policies are environmentally friendly. So it's like you're putting something on the advertisement of a product that like you may not necessarily think would have a good impact on the environment. And the companies make the decision to put something on there to appeal to the consumer, like, oh, I'm being smart with my money and I'm being smart in helping the environment by buying this product because it's 100% recyclable, or because it is net it like doesn't really release as much chemicals into the environment when degraded, which as the definition stated can be very deceptive.
Yeah. And just like going off of that, like green meaning is in like sustainability. So
Yeah.
there's been a lot of like this wave of kind of greenwashing, as you said. And so, now that we realize like a lot of people, and this is similar to, if you are aware of like the kind of like the organic label kind of misleading efforts that people have.
Right.
Um,
Right.
it's not just organic, right? There's like the antibiotic free, gluten free. We were just talking before this about how milk on in some milks and stuff, it says antibiotic free. All milk in the United States is regulated to be antibiotic free. So
Right.
these extra labels make it to the consumer to believe that what they're buying is a better quality, that it's a cleaner or just better for the person in general. And it's for that reason that a lot of people buy those kinds of items. When in reality, it doesn't make a whole lot of a difference, or it makes zero difference at all. And like the same with
Right.
organic, to have that USDA organic label, it has to be, I think, around 95% organic, but the rest 5% doesn't have to be. And so this idea is that it can mislead people into believing that this item is really worth more than it should be, and that people
Yeah.
justify, their purchases. And it's very similar with greenwashing, with sustainability.
Right.
So like
Right.
greenwashing, like you said, makes them appear a lot more sustainable than they really are, and it's a ploy. It really is. And so
Yeah.
just some
Yeah.
examples that we're going to talk about, like McDonald's and how they introduced paper straws. Those were not
Yeah.
non-recyclable. And so there's very funny things that they have. So Coca-Cola
Yeah.
Life, that also was a kind of
Right.
green move almost. And
Yeah.
it's with this green. There's a lot of
Yeah.
green that comes with it.
Yes, because green, everything, trees are green, grass is green, and green is kind of synonymous with environmental consciousness and sustainability in our everyday lives and for the future. However, I know a lot of these brands, like you mentioned, Coca-Cola, does take advantage of this and the consumer mindset when they're trying to advertise. For example, like going back to Coca-Cola, they had this statement that came out with the hashtag World Without Waste, and they said that they're investing in new technologies to recycle the unrecyclable. So their bottles are now 100% recyclable, and 25% of the bottles plastic content is made of marine plastic harvested from the ocean. However, they also neglected to mention that they are the world's leading producer of plastic waste in oceans in every part of the world. So like, besides recycling being having like not as sustainable as portrayed or as people think.
Hmm.
And it's just like super deceptive for what Coca-Cola is doing. Additionally, like Sprite, I know they changed their like bottles to be clear now instead of green
Yeah.
because they said something about like the chemicals in the green dye can like leak into the environment. However, they just changed it because they didn't want their bottle to be so easily spotted in landfills because
Yeah.
of the like
Yeah.
green, you know what I mean? Like, oh, it's Sprite, but now it's clear, and so now it looks like every other bottle,
Yeah.
right? So that those are some prime examples of greenwashing. It's used to like fuel their own economic agenda without really with like trying to put up a face to the people.
Exactly, and just to name a few more like big brands, Keurig, they have misleading recycling claims.
Yeah.
IKEA has accredited illegal logging. Windex has misread misleading plastic packaging claims, yeah, so packing claims. A few more
Yeah.
countries like Shell, Unilever, all these big companies have
Right.
misleading greenwashing practices that they employ. And again, like you said, like we've built this consumer idea and how people kind of cater towards this consumer mindset where certain colors or certain kind of, I guess, parts of a certain advertisement or something are
Yeah.
supposed to evoke a certain emotion in us or a certain thought in us. And so you kind of associate some colors or some symbols with this idea. So like with Target, right? If you see a bullseye that's similar, you'll know it's Target. And it's one of these brands that you're made to realize of what, what the company is or what it holds. And
Yeah.
so
And
go ahead.
yeah, keep going.
I was gonna say so like red is supposed to evoke like the emotion of anger or passion, but
Yeah.
green is supposed to emanate life and
Yeah.
sustainability and being healthy, right? So you see a
Right,
lot of
right,
these
right, right.
colors, they're not done by accident. It's all meticulously and perfectly planned, right?
Yeah.
So as I was saying, like the Coca-Cola life was green for a reason, but it didn't really make too much of a difference on
Right,
the
right.
environment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that when we look at these big companies and these corporations and how much they're contributing to like climate change and the degrading environment in our world,
Yeah.
and I know there's a statistic that's like the top 100 companies produce like 71% of the global emissions. So 100 companies alone. So includes energy sector, oil, food, all that stuff. It produces 71% of the world's emissions. So like that's definitely a problem. And I think when a lot of people, particularly politicians, when we have conversations about environmental consciousness in regards to economic growth, they
Yeah.
like to they like to decouple them.
Hmm.
And so let me just explain what like the myth of decoupling economic growth and ecological degradation is. So, there's economic growth in a capitalist system, growth is good, right?
Yeah.
We want more money. We want to just continuously get more money. A lot of times, what we don't understand is there are literal resource limits and physical limits to how much we can grow economically. And a lot of these like policies that are passed don't really have that in mind. So they kind of see the environmental like kind of like graph. So imagine like an economic graph and an environmental graph. So the
Hmm.
environmental graph is going up with the economics graph. But in reality, there isn't any evidence to support that they can be decoupled because if the time and time again, if money has gone up and progress and growth in the business sector has gone up, a lot of times we see this trend that environmental degradation literally goes up because our environment is being ripped from the resources are being ripped from the environment, and we're kind of like destroying the environment for those profits. And we'll get to the point where we can't really grow very much, like a plateau or like a decline,
Yeah.
because we've exhausted our resources so much. So that's something that we don't necessarily think about a lot. And I think it's really important that we do, because it not only is for like future generations and how they're gonna live, and it's also for like every other organism that we share our world with, and also for business. If we're talking about business, we all like business, right?
Yeah.
But economic growth is a lot of times seen as this like holy grail of a quality of life, when a lot of times we don't even see the benefit. We don't, like, personally, like on a like individual scale in a country, we there are still people suffering in poverty in America, which has the highest GDP in the world,
Yeah.
right? So like it's a really difficult conversation to tackle when we're discussing environmental policy with the interests of big corporations, because they have so much influential power in this regard.
Yeah. And it's great that you mentioned that because like we talked about this in our first episode actually about like
Right.
the I remember saying like what good is there to um like almost abuse a world for its resources when there's going to be
Right,
nothing
right,
left for it, and especially with
right.
finances, right? Like what's the point
Mhm.
in in destroying the environment to gain all this money when that money won't be worth anything in the future because we
Right.
won't have one. It's with this kind of importance that we place that we like really talk about, and I'm glad that you mentioned it with like decoupling. I think there's even a bigger kind of impact that it has with the fact of it's almost negatively correlated in the sense of where
Yeah.
as the economy goes up and as you gain more profit, you're going
Right.
to just because again like you said you reach a certain limit sustainably in which you can produce so much that you start to kind of stoop into and access the realm of the environment and access
Right.
the resources that the environment holds that you can't take sustainably. You have to take
Right.
it with negative impacts to the environment. And so it's for this reason that as profit increases, typically the amount of I guess the environmental kind of I guess we can put the environment as a
Negative
standard of
impact on the
quality,
environment.
right?
Yeah.
So the standard of
Yeah.
quality of the environment would decrease. And so it's for
Right.
this reason that I think we've realized now that we need to up our game really because climate change has presented itself because greenwashing
Yes.
has been in effect since the 80s. It's really
Yeah.
been known since the 80s, but just
Yeah.
now, since recently, since the 21st century in the 2000s, that we've really ramped it up due to the kind of the I guess the internet,
Yeah.
and really just how globally we've made things and we've really globalized
Yes. Yes. Yes.
in this century, and so it's for this reason that we really need to we've opened up our eyes to sustainability, and it's also
Correct.
for this reason, unfortunately, that idea of sustainability, that passion has been taken advantage of for profit, and like you said, right about this decoupling of things, we use and a lot of these companies will use that advantage that we have about this passion, right? And they're going
Mhm.
to mislead us and
Right. Right.
with
Right.
this they're going to manipulate their audience, and everybody has a given audience, right? And the target audience is for people that want to be more sustainable. People are a lot more likely to buy something that's labeled as more sustainable compared to less sustainable. And I'm sure that, I mean, I could probably find a research statistic on it that if they were presented with an option, with two options, one that was not sustainable and one that was sustainable but or marketed as sustainable but was maybe a dollar or two more
Right.
in like let's just say for like some clothes or something, they would
Mhm.
most likely maybe just like a 1% or 2%, 5%, even let's just say 10% for the heck of it, a 10%
Yeah.
upcharge. Most people would probably just select the sustainable option just because they
Yeah.
believe it helps the environment more.
Yeah.
And it's big that we put emphasis on that because a lot of the younger generation now believes in that, believes in being
Right.
sustainable, and believes in being better towards our environment and better towards the world. And
Mhm.
so companies that are taking advantage of this really, put into effect the myth of kind of decoupling that you mentioned
Right.
before.
Right. Right. And I think it's really interesting. You mentioned like in recent years how we've become more global.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that this issue goes back way farther to where we are all literally becoming global, right? We can talk about the global north versus the global south, and like colonialism and its role in the development of countries that we even see today,
Yeah.
right? Like we see a lot of like lower socioeconomic and developing countries suffering as a result of imperialism and colonialism that a lot of the global north had done. So we're talking like England, the Dutch, the Portuguese, Americans even. and how we've gone over, invaded, kind of take their resources, and then kind of force them to still buy manufactured goods from their mother or father country, and while we like mine the resources from their country cheaply to make those and then increase our own GDP while letting them slowly increase theirs, but not to the extent that we see the global north. And it's really difficult to kind of lump humanity in humanity's impact on the environment because if we look at people, like I mentioned, the top 100 companies produce 71% of the world's emissions. It's really an unfair comparison if we're comparing somebody from rural China to like a corporate boss, right?
Yeah.
Literally, they have vastly different effects on the environment, and it's just unfair to kind of target and have this sense like dangle this like sense of responsibility over, oh, you're destroying our environment, over people who literally are not, right? If you look at indigenous people groups across the world who have learned to live with and coexist with their environment fruitfully and thrive sustainably for thousands of years. They're literally giving back to their environment. Like living, they've been net zero, right?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to just like lump that, as I said. And like if we can look at the issue with the global north, and those include in countries like Canada, the U.S., Europe, Russia, and then maybe in Australia, even though it's not literally north, but it's considered a global north, and the global south is like everywhere else, mostly including developing countries, and those countries, like we like to target India for so many emissions, or China as well, but their populations are so much more. Like, if we compare per capita, they have less emissions per capita than say the U.S.
Hmm. And
Right,
yeah.
because of the population.
Yeah, and exactly, and I like how you mentioned about indigenous populations. It's also a fact of like how we've, I guess, developed technologically, where technologically society has, especially with the Industrial Revolution, we've really, really started to differ at that point, where
Right.
we wanted to desire more. We wanted more. We wanted more because of the rapid industrialization and the rapid increase
Yeah, and
in
the ease
the
of getting resources and stuff.
exactly in the
Yeah.
speed in which we could create things. And so
Yeah.
from then on, it's become less of kind of the craftsmanship of a person and taking the time and doing
Right.
something. And
Right.
with that slow speed, you're still appreciating nature and appreciating the environment and not really creating a whole lot of impact. Where versus now, or past or post industrialization, where we really have put a lot of less emphasis on the
Yeah.
environment. And for these
Right.
industries, it's the development of it has really changed, right? And
Mhm.
I think you're about to go into a point maybe about like how even though we probably like we develop as much as we want technologically, that doesn't really change a whole lot.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I like the point you just brought up. Like innovations and technological advances, and how like a lot of people, especially like I know, for example, Bill Gates or Elon Musk, they are pushing their own like technologies and how they can save the world and how they can like decrease climate change to like it is a noticeable by noticeable margin. However, that's inherently untrue because let me give an example of electric cars. Right, Norway. I believe 8 out of 10 cars in Norway is electric. So, if you have 20 cars, 16 of them will be electric in Norway. And electricity, yes, is a cleaner energy technically from like fossil fuels. However, if we look at the amount of emissions from mining the stuff for the cars and like the power plants to get the electricity,
Yeah.
it a lot of times does kind of eclipse that of just a normal car, like a gas car. But also, what's really interesting about Norway and it being a pedestal or like kind of like an icon for how we all should live in all the other countries, their number one export is crude oil. So they're literally paying for their own like uh, advances and technologies by like they're saving emissions by profiting off of emissions essentially.
Yeah.
And this is like a pattern that we see across all technological advances because if we aren't willing to change how we use the technology.
Hmm.
So we just develop better ways to say better ways to exploit the environment, but we don't know we have addressed why are we exploiting this environment in this way to get this thing.
Yeah,
So we're just doing it faster and more efficiently. We're still gonna do it. It's still gonna have a negative effect on the environment. We're just gonna have the luxury of doing it faster and more efficiently. So just tackling the how and why are we using technology like this, and how can we use it in a different way, or how can we go about it in a more sustainable
hmm
and conscious way that we can like live as kind of workers for our environment, because at the end of the day we are products of our environment, and our environment is the most important thing on the earth,
yeah.
not just for us but for everything else. So I just believe that technological advances like won't be a one-stop like solution to an environmentally sustainable future, because it's going to take a lot more than that.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I think there's a point that I want to bring up, and this
Mhm.
hits my one for the day, but it's the perpetual cycle of
Yes.
deception. And
Yeah.
this perpetual cycle of deception that a lot of these companies use. And I'm glad that you brought the idea, the example of electric cars. I believe 19% of emissions, or 20% of emissions, something like that, are for electricity. People
Yeah.
fail to realize how much it really costs the environment to produce the
Right.
electricity that we use. We will never truly be able to go net zero just by
Yeah.
changing our like technologies, because at the end of the
Yeah.
day it's going to require some form of energy, and the only way that we've
Yeah.
created the mass amounts of energy that we need to support our really big and growing population is through fossil fuels. And so it's for this reason that we really like have placed such an importance on fossil fuels. And if you really want to learn more about fossil fuels and its impacts, please check out our first episode. Or if you want to look
Yeah.
at kind of, I guess we talk about specifically like pollution. If you want to find the effects of pollution, we also have an episode on that. But really just looking into the consumer mindset, people have
Right.
shied away from the bad things, of course, that they want to highlight about
Yeah.
fossil fuels and climate change, and they've put more emphasis on what it's going to do. And so these false
Yeah.
ideas, well, and I'm glad that you also brought up the idea of Norway. Nobody talks about how they export crude oil. They just talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
how they're really set the standard of how life should
Yeah.
be, right? And
Exactly.
people fail to mention the blind side of it, right? So they're
Yeah.
blindsided by this false idea. I mean, it's somewhat true that Norway's this great place that has great
Yeah, yeah,
quality of
like, in many
life.
ways, it is a very advanced and like, very, like, conscious
Yeah,
country that we can use as a role model.
yeah.
However, it's important to, like, take into consideration all facets of the
Yes,
argument.
it's more of this one-sided idea of Norway being this amazing country, but failing to
Right,
recognize
right.
and realize more of its offsets and really not stepping back, if that makes sense. People
I
aren't
agree.
stepping back and taking a perspective into things. They're more of just kind of looking and narrowed into this one idea, right? And so people, I love saying that people want to see only what they want to see. And so
Right.
people only want to see the standard of life and wanting to mimic that, but they're not looking back. And so just looking off of that too, what's going to be interesting and seeing for the future, and what I'm really really interested by, are these net zero or zero targets by countries. These pledges. So Sweden and Germany have legally binding net zero targets for 2045.
Yeah,
France, Denmark, Spain,
and
Hungary,
okay,
and Luxembourg have theirs
like
set for 2050 though.
right, yeah, like you said, like, net zero, it is really very an interesting point because, for example, if like, this goes into, like, if we all were to go net zero, like, every country in the world were to live normally and go net zero, right? It
hmm
would require an increase of about 3 to 500% in the mining of silver and gold, and an increase of about 23 or 2700% of lithium.
Yeah.
And these mines prove incredibly detrimental to the soil, to water, to indigenous populations, just to the ecosystem in general. And with such a sharp increase, it's kind of like going against that net zero, right? Because
Yeah.
you're having like increasing mining increases the aridity of the soil, so farmers are forced to move out and have no way to make their living or to like enrich the soil, get their food. And it's just there's so many like negatives that happen with net zero along with the positives that could potentially come from them. And I think it's a really interesting point you brought up.
Yeah, actually, I want to mention that about mining. So, and like, did you talk about lithium?
Yes, lithium.
Yeah, and so with lithium, Chile, and I don't know why I remember this, but in Chile, so they're a very very big producer of lithium, and
Yeah.
so mining these salt flats, in Chile requires a lot of materials, and it kind of like you said disrupts the local populations, and so
Right.
in those areas that they are mining all the lithium, they're has been complete just drying of all the rivers, and people have experienced extreme drought. And so there's this person that just said here that we used to have a river and now it doesn't exist. There isn't a drop
Yes,
of water,
like
and
the Colorado River and a bunch of rivers in China,
and
right?
that's an episode for another time. That's a topic for
Uh-huh.
another episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we have with kind of mining and offsetting climate change by doing another resource, we are also negatively impacting those local communities. And so there really comes to this point of what creates the least impact on our society. And this question is so multifaceted that it's very, very difficult for people to kind of pinpoint on what is the right answer. And so going net zero has its benefits, but it also has its drawbacks, like we just mentioned with gold and such. Also,
Yeah.
with that of going net zero, is very difficult for people to go net zero because of the great thing called greed. And
Hmm.
greed is a major pusher and kind of proponent of constant development because people want to have more or experience more, and that leads for more innovation and more development. But with that comes the kind of almost like consumption of these resources, and so with increased consumption leads to a lot
Hmm.
more negative environments, there are negative impacts on the environment. And so
Yeah.
like I said, we have a few more countries: Japan, Korea, Canada, and New Zealand have passed laws committing to achieve net zero by 2050, while Ireland, Chile, and Fiji have proposed legislation. With Chile and any of these other countries, they're going to need their their energy from somewhere. And so I know in Japan and Korea, they have nuclear power plants, or I'm not sure if Korea
Yeah.
still has any. I know Japan at least still has one.
Yes. Yes.
But that's one way that does not really produce emissions. But it does affect the local water. We will, that's another topic for another episode.
Yeah.
But it's net zero carbon wise, and so it's for that reason that a lot of these countries emphasize that. But then there arises the issue of what are we going to do with the nuclear waste,
Right.
and there's a lot of kind of controversy behind this, right? there's
Uh-huh.
there's the net zero of nuclear, but then there's also net zero of mining, which also causes problems. But then there's net zero of another item that we're like with, or I guess the false deception of
Right.
using electric powered vehicles, which
Mhm.
in and of itself produces fossil fuels, right? Or consumes
Yeah.
fossil fuels. So there's really no easy way out, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. And I definitely agree. This is one of like the most pertinent issues that face not just our generation, but the like fate of humanity totally. Like if we like we have some possible solutions, but a lot of them require, mass efforts from the populace because this is like a mass effort and not just like one person can do this and will be able to save the environment,
Yeah.
right? So like it a lot of times we like to like target politicians and target voting and voting for laws that are favorable for the environment. However, a lot of times when we start from we do like a top down approach,
Hmm.
it kind of like shifts the focus away from literal like climate and environmental goals
Hmm.
into serving more political goals. So people are
Exactly.
going to like work in the favor of their own agenda to get into that position of power, promising those things from like an environmental standpoint, but it shifts a lot of the uh focus on from like the well-being of our environment to politics and individuality and stuff like that. For example, like like to target big oil. But I know BP, which is a British oil
Mm-hmm.
company, they created the carbon footprint.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of that? Right,
Yeah.
the carbon footprint, individual carbon footprint. You like
What
calculate it and see how
for
much.
those that don't know who what carbon footprint is,
Yeah,
let's explain.
it's like yeah. So the carbon footprint is how much emissions that how you would live, how many emissions and how many Earths you would need to if everybody lived like you did, how many Earths you would need to support that energy wise.
If you want to
But
know what your carbon footprint is, search up carbon
yeah,
footprint calculator, I believe, and it'll tell you
yeah.
like how many Earths it would require.
You
It's
can
really
take a
cool.
test and yeah, it's like diet and
Yeah.
it's cool. But that the reason that BP engineered that was because due to increased scrutiny in their from the majority of people, it did that so we can shift the blame from and like shift the mindset of responsibility at the corporate level to individual levels. And I think what we do need to do is shift it from a corporate to an individual level, but not just an individual, but like a mass individual level.
Hmm.
So like anything you can do that's like attending climate protests. I've been trying to find some, but Nashville it gets hectic sometimes. But yeah, I've been trying to like find if you can do anything. Like need anybody with any set of skills. Like if you can cook, fine. Like people are gonna need soup. If you can make clothing, people are gonna need clothes. If you can make like protective gear, people are gonna need that if something happens. But like attending those things and showing people and kind of rallying against that central point of climate change is a start, starting from the bottom up instead of the top to the bottom, like a bottom up approach to tackling climate change and living more sustainably. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be a more effective way. And like things like gardens, like food gardens, community food gardens, it's not just cheaper for food, because like food right now, it's just super expensive
Yeah.
if you've been to the grocery store. And, you know, but it fosters a sense of kind of community, but also teaches people how to plant things and how to grow and how to like live and eat healthily and kind of permablitzing, which it's a term that I need to kind of analyze. Permablitzing is basically you get a group of people or like a community of people
Hmm.
and you transform a place from a kind of a desolate one into one that's thriving with plants and flora and fauna, and you kind of like go in over a few days, plant a garden. It's really cool, and I'd really love to do that
Yeah.
if I can get a group of people. And like you just got to reach out because there are a lot of people who are really interested in things like that.
If you're in
And it's
Nashville, let me know.
yeah. And you have to like kind of use that kind of community mindset, work together and start from the bottom to go up, kind of like see some actual change to ensure a future that is safe and sustainable
Yeah,
for future generations.
exactly.
And with that, our discussion comes to an end. We thank you for listening and hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes. Don't forget to follow the Pepper Podcast on Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.